in my mind, have got 10 immortal drivers from all time, and it takes in people like Bernd Rosemeyer, Tazio Nuvolari, Rudolf Caracciola, Fangio, Prost, Senna, Jackie Stewart, Jim Clark. Stirling may not have been as successful in Ultimate World Championship terms, but in my opinion that's a criticism of the World Championship and not of Stirling Moss.
Stirling Moss was my hero. He projected an image of the fast and the furious. It was a colourful, glamorous and exciting sport. I had his autograph as a young boy growing up and still have it.
In his time, when he was racing, most of the British public felt he was the best in the world. He represented Great Britain, not because he was just a British driver, but because he had demonstrated he could beat all of the others.
Stirling drove competitively in 85 different types of car. Now that takes in 500cc single-seaters, takes in Formula One cars like Van Wall with the engine in front, Cooper and Lotus with the engine behind, Mercedes-Benz. It takes in rally cars. Weekend after weekend he was out racing. I think it was born in Stirling.
The background of the family was motor racing. His father was the first British driver to drive at the Indianapolis Speedway in America, and he did moderately well. And his mother also was a very successful rallier. She drove for a firm called Merendes, which was sort of like a Bentley of the day. There was something within the Moss character, something in the Moss build-up, something in the Moss genes, if you like, which made them all very successful drivers.
Stirling and I were literally brought up with horses, ponies it was of course then, and we both jumped. And I was so pleased if I beat Big Brother. It wasn't very often, I might add. He was good. If he'd carried on, he'd have been good. He always loved cars, you understand. He had this Austin 7 when he was about 7 or 9 or something, and always was marking time with horses till he could drive. When he was 16 he got a Morgan three-wheeler, so I was extremely pleased when he got his cars and I had his ponies, except he used to tune his cars by the stable. I wasn't very pleased about that.
After the war we were in this situation where a lot of new circuits were developing for what were essentially in this country amateur racers. A lot of them had got a lot of money. They bought the best cars that they could. But to a great extent in this country it was an elitist and some might say fairly snobbish sport. I mean, the slogan at Brooklands, which had been the racing track before the war, was the right crowd and no crowding. And they meant it.
It was, you know, gentlemen racers going out having their fun at weekends, and the family would go too, the blanket would go down on the grass, and it was just so different, completely different than now.
The thing that really got the scene going, the motor racing scene going in the 50s, was the 500 movement. John Cooper's father had welded two Fiats together and produced the first Cooper with a little Jap engine in it.
It had mainly been gentlemen racers with substantial budgets, whereas with the Cooper 500, anybody that could put together a few £100 could go out and go racing, and they certainly did in large numbers.
I was there when he drove the first racing car. I remember when we delivered the car, we took it over to their home at Bray, and we drove to a nearby building site where there were some roads, private roads. And as soon as I saw him drive the car, I realized he had a future. He was good.
So Stirling gets his 500cc Cooper and immediately establishes that he's a very bright new star. I mean, Stirling was just as impactful in those late 40s, early 1950s as Michael Schumacher has subsequently been in 1991.
He was too bloody quick for me, that was for sure. I came a fair way down the pecking order when you're comparing drivers with Stirling. I particularly remember an incident at Goodwood. There was a half-page picture in the newspaper the day after the race which said Tyrrell leads Moss through the chicane at Goodwood, which was fine, except that Stirling went on to win the race, and I read the article in Chichester Hospital.
Dad was always there, always in the pits with Stirling, always supportive. Whether you won or you lost, Dad was there. You were expected to win. Second is acceptable, but it's not the same. Stirling was dedicated from, I think, birth, to be truthful, to cars and to getting better and better.
When Stirling started, I think people thought that he was a flash in the pan. I think they thought that he was an accident about to happen because he was too fast. But accidents didn't occur in Stirling's early racing career. He was pretty well accident-free. And he just proved to be very, very fast indeed.
Come in normally and steer normally to go round the bend like that. And just as you get before the bend, put the brakes on. Just a little bit, not very hard, which tends to break the back away.
And the front wheel slides a little too.
Yes, but not quite as much, you see. Then just as it starts to break away, straighten the car up. Like that. Not normal correction. And at the same time, put your foot hard on the accelerator, which then gets the car drifting. Like that.
All four wheels going sideways across the road.
Yes.
And then hold her in the drift with the throttle and very delicate steering.
There's very little. You just have a slight feel on the steering wheel, but not much.
As he developed his racing career, and as it became quite clear that he was in fact a prodigy that was showing extraordinary talent, much more talent than people realized at the time, it became necessary for him to perhaps have some help. And he asked me if I'd become his manager. I suspect at the time that he was much or as much interested in having a travelling companion to be with him, because he could be quite lonely, as it was to have someone to look after his affairs.
Ken thought it would be a good thing if he could get a drive for Stirling in the official Works Jaguar team in the car TT at Dundrod in Northern Ireland. So Ken goes to Jaguar and they said, thank you, but no thank you. He's not experienced enough. He hasn't driven this sort of a car on this sort of a circuit. A very famous journalist called Tommy Wisdom had a private Jaguar XK120, and he said, I'll lend you mine, Stirling. And Stirling got in that car and he blew all the others away, including the Works Jaguars, won the race at Dundrod. It was the actual race was on his 21st birthday, and that, I think, with hindsight, must have been the real national impact that put Stirling on the map.
Stirling was one of the first of the professional racing drivers who actually earned a living through being a racing driver. He charged people money to drive their cars. It was generally accepted in those days that you either had family money or made your money in some other way, and then you went out and had a jolly good time at the weekends.
He was a star almost from day one. He presented himself very well with his white crash hat, which became part out of him, something for the Brits to latch onto. You know, we needed a few stars in those days, and Stirling was certainly one of them.
I well remember hitchhiking, as I used to do because I had no money, to the Brands Hatch race that takes place every year, maybe it still does, on Boxing Day. And that was very exciting to watch, and one felt very proud to watch the best of British doing what they wanted to do on a home circuit. I also remember after one of those races, being in the paddock, of course without a ticket. I got there at 4 in the morning, and I saw Stirling Moss. I was 14 or 15 at the time, and I remember just standing and staring with my mouth open. This was a hero, but a real hero to a schoolboy, and I was standing 2 yards from him. I think I got embarrassed in the end and turned away, but I'll never forget the instance.
Stirling always, bless him, had this fiercely patriotic streak. There were not the British cars available that would do well, because in those days Italy was very much at the forefront, and it wasn't till he got to a stage where his talent was so good that the British cars that were available obviously weren't good enough, that he got a 250F Maserati.
Stirling was certainly a great patriot. When he was obliged to drive a Maserati, which is, I think, manager and father had bought for him without consulting him, it must have irked him, because it's just not how he is. He wanted to be British from his toes to the top of his helmet, including his car. And I think to have to go that route wasn't his preferred choice. But it is very necessary to win by choosing the right car and the right team at the right time. And I think various possibilities, various championships eluded him because he was in the wrong place, the wrong time.
With the support of his father, I did prize him into a Foreign Works team. I realised, and Alfred realised, that to drive for Mercedes meant that he was going to be given the once only opportunity of a lifetime.
For 1955, Moss was offered a contract with the German firm and decided to accept. To a professional racing driver, a straightforward business deal. They need his services, and he needs the experience. Apart from anything else, he would be driving with Fangio, world champion. And with Neubauer as team manager, he would be given a first-class car and told to get in and drive it. His nickname, The Boy, somehow no longer seems appropriate.
Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts.